So, welcome everyone. Good evening, and welcome again. Uh, Today we have a very nice and very important webinar with Dr. Jesse. Welcome again, Dr. Jesse.
Thank you so much.
We will talk about the whale sharks on the Red Sea. Before we start, I would like to remind you on small uh, things. So, how to use a little bit our Zoom. All your video and you will be unmuted all the time. We have below the screen the Q&A. You can put and share all your questions and do some chats. Make sure that you control your sound to the max. We'll be waiting for all your questions, whatever you want. We will be approx 1 hour 15 minutes. We'll take a small break on the middle. We will share with you a small video about the whale sharks. Before we start, we'd like to remind you about what we have next week from webinars. We have a Wednesday free diving workshop with Natalia Zarkova. She's a worldwide championship. She will talk about free diving. And we have another one Thursday about sea turtles, work awareness, these 2 days. So Wednesday, 20th of May, and Thursday, 21st of May. If you would like to join, you can go to our Instagram and follow the screen, and you will find all the links. And this is the QR code. So, Dr. Jesse, welcome.
Thank you again.
So, we are hearing you, all of us.
Okay, great. I'll just start sharing my screen, and we will get this going. All right. Is it coming through? Everybody can see it? All right. So I'm talking about whale sharks in the Red Sea tonight. It's what I did my PhD on. Why people want to dive with whale sharks is usually pretty obvious. They're huge, they're docile, and they're beautiful. You know, it's just great big polka dotted dopey fish, and they're wonderful to swim with. And unlike most of you hear swimming with sharks, you think great white, you think tiger shark. It's none of the worries that people mostly have, none of the initial reaction that most people will have when they hear sharks really applies to whale sharks. They're huge, but all of their defense mechanisms are passive. They have massively thick skin. It's the thickest skin in the animal kingdom, so they're covered in armor. And if something does start harassing them, they'll just dive. So they never really do anything aggressive. They never do anything to sort of attack anything. So worries about shark attacks simply don't apply to this animal. So people like diving with them, people like swimming with them because, okay, it's safe, it's beautiful, and it's huge. But why do we like studying? What's interesting about whale sharks? Well, a lot of the same things. It's huge, and it's weird. It's a shark that is from a sort of group that normally it's a pelagic planktivorous shark that comes from a group which normally lives on the bottom, never gets particularly big. This is a nurse shark, and it, along with the zebra shark, are the whale shark's two closest living relatives. And they both live on the bottom. They both forage for invertebrates along coral reefs. And they never get very big. They maximum, maybe, if you include the length of the tail, hit about 3 meters. So you've got this very weird animal that's sort of isolated within its own family. It has a very different lifestyle from anything else that's closely related to it. In addition, it's a planktivore. It's a plankton specialist, and it had to undergo some very specific adaptations as a shark to become a plankton specialist. It has a very unique feeding apparatus. It's got these filter pads on its gills, which don't act like a sieve. It's not like a mesh that catches the plankton as it's passing through. the pads actually set up these currents which bounce the plankton back to the back of the throat so they can eat things that are smaller than their mesh size. These are very specific adaptations. And so to become a plankton specialist, but it also specializes in living in some of the most plankton-poor regions in the world. So if you look between these two red lines, this is the range of the whale shark. This is a pretty typical heat map. The sort of warmer colors are high productivity, where you would expect to have large amounts of plankton. And the cooler colors, the dark blues, the little bits of light blue, that's where you would expect to have lower amounts of plankton. So the whale shark specializes in eating plankton in some of the most plankton-poor regions in the ocean. And I use this analogy a lot, but it can be very useful to think of the whale shark as a desert animal, going from hotspot to hotspot in what is otherwise a pretty food-poor region. So when we talk about whale shark research, there's really two periods of whale shark research. We talk about sort of historical research, and the earliest document that we have, which is definitely a whale shark encounter, comes from 1801, and it's a travel log, and it's just somebody's travel diary, and the guy's on a boat, and he describes seeing a giant fish that was on whale shark aggregation, a whale shark encounter on aggregation. It's unmistakably a whale shark encounter, but it happened about 30 years before the whale shark was formally described. So the first scientist that I'm going to talk about in the history of the whale shark is this guy named Andrew Smith, and in 1828, he happened to be in the right place at the right time in South Africa when some fishermen brought up a whale shark. And he was a trained doctor. He performed the formal description. So the first description of the species, the first description in the scientific literature is in about 1828. After that, you get roughly about 10 papers a year. Sorry, the y-axis isn't labeled. So this is number of publications that are about whale sharks each year or each decade. And so you get about 10 publications, 5 to 10 publications a decade for the next 70 years, yeah? And then something happens. You get a big jump. And that something has a name, and that name is Dr. Eugene Willis Gudger. So Gudger, in 1912, encountered a whale shark, a preserved whale shark skin in Florida. Some fishermen had brought up a whale shark skin, and they had preserved it. And he just happened to walk by and see it, and he fell in love with the animal and devoted a 30-year, 40-year career to studying this animal. He literally wrote the book on whale sharks. And even after Gudger died, there was some momentum in the research, and we were able to sort of continue on in this elevated level of publication up until like the 1980s. The only other name I'm going to mention, and unfortunately I can't find a picture of her, is a woman named Dr. Faye Wolfson, who published the paper that I based this slide on. She collected every whale shark publication from 1828 to 1985. And in that bibliography, there's only 320 records. So you've got, about 160 years, 320 records. So they were seeing 2 whale sharks a year. And just as a case in point on that, you've got both Gudger and Wolfson never saw a living specimen of the whale shark in their lives. You have people who've devoted their careers to this animal, and they never got to see one in the water. In Saudi, if we start looking at that historically in Saudi, this is from a book that Gudger published in like the late 1930s. And it details, you can see this is a map of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, and the points on it are places where whale sharks were fatally impaled on steamshippers. So this was the sum total of knowledge on whale sharks in the Red Sea for a very long time. All that we knew was that 4 of them had been hit by boats. That's the extent of whale sharks in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. So something changed. We're definitely seeing more than 2 whale sharks a year. So what happened? And the thing that happened was the discovery of places where whale sharks could be reliably encountered. And the first one, this one off of Australia, this site is called Ningaloo Reef. And you see, you can go there. This guy named Jeff Taylor started noticing that he could see whale sharks regularly if he went there in the right season. And he published that in 1986. And since then, we've discovered aggregations like this all over the world, including in 2008, we discovered this one off of Saudi Arabia. Now, when I say discovered, I mean the scientific community discovered. The locals had some knowledge of this. It hadn't been formally studied, but they did have some knowledge of this before scientists got there. It just hadn't been formally researched. So when we realized that there was a whale shark aggregation there, the first thing we wanted to try, it's the first thing everyone tries, is a method called visual census. And that's just a fancy way of saying we went down and looked. So if we're looking at the map of Saudi Arabia, this square is over sort of the Elite region, and this is our hotspot. This little backward 7-shaped reef here is called Shib Habil. I don't need to tell most of you, it translates roughly into rope reef. We just call it whale shark reef because it's where we see all of our sharks. So each one of these dots is a whale shark encounter. I think this figure goes up to 2014. So from 2010 to 2014, this is all whale shark encounters around Shib Habil. And some of these dots represent more than one shark that we saw in the same place at the same time. So once we can reliably find sharks, once we're starting to see them regularly, we can start trying things like photo ID. And I'm going to go briefly into photo ID. I want to explain it because it's cool. So we get a picture of a shark and we get the side of it. And what we do first is we highlight 3 landmarks. This is a little outdated. We don't necessarily use these 3 landmarks anymore. I use this for presentations because it's easy to see. But it still conveys the idea. So we highlight 3 landmarks, and then we map the spot. You can see the little red dots on the spots in between these landmarks. And so we've got this triangle here, and we've mapped all of the spots. Now we have a fingerprint for this shark. So we can just erase the picture. We no longer care about the picture. The software we have is just going to analyze this fingerprint. And then it'll go through our database and look for sharks that have a similar fingerprint. And it'll try and compare them. And you can see that the spots don't match up exactly, but that doesn't matter because difference in the camera angle, difference in where the relationship between where the whale shark and the diver were at the time the picture was taken, those can shift the spots. But you can see that for every red dot, there's a black circle that sort of corresponds with it, except for this red dot right here up at the front. So you can just see, 2 red dots, 2 black circles, 3 red dots, 3 black circles, 2 red dots, 2 black circles, all the way back, except for this one up front. So then we go back to the original picture, and we can see that there's a pilotfish in the way of the camera. So these are the same shark. This is the software would shoot this back at us and say, this is a very close match. And it would ask us to take another look at it with just human eyes and confirm. And so this shot on the bottom was taken in 2011 in a leaf. This shot at the top was taken in 2013 in a leaf. And so we can start to track how often we see the same sharks, which sharks come back, how often do we encounter new sharks. We can start to do some population modeling based off of that. And the great thing about this is we don't even need to be there. We can take, if somebody wanted to hand us a photo, we can run these ID programs on it. So if you see a whale shark, or if you see a manta, or if you see a turtle, if you see something big and cool, send it our way. We'll tell you everything we know about it. We'll tell you what the species is. We'll tell you if we can ID it to the individual. We'll tell you if it's been seen before. Let us know. Or send it to the Hope of Spring. They're working with us. They'll send us these pictures. They've agreed to be a source for us, and we really appreciate them. We appreciate any photos you can send us, and we will of course credit you when we run the databases and when we publish. You'll be in the acknowledgements. So here's so based off of what we've done photo ID wise, based off of what we've done just going and looking, this is what we can tell a little bit about just general things on whale sharks. We've encountered, up to 2018, we encountered about 316 individuals, and photo ID'd about 360 individuals. We're still processing the 2019 data, different, working on different projects, things get sidetracked. We haven't quite finished 2019. But from those 316 ID photos, we know we've got 165 individuals. We can tell you that, we usually see sharks on their own just feeding at the surface, but sometimes we'll see them in groups of like 3 or 4. I've seen, very rarely we'll see 6, and once or twice we've seen 10, but usually it's groups of 1 to 4. And they'll sort of swim like this, just chowing down on the same patch of plankton. Based off of some population modeling, we'd say that during the aggregation seasons, there are between about 15 or 34 whale sharks present in the area at any one time, just based off of our models.
So how many kind of whale shark do we have on the Red Sea?
There's only one kind of whale shark anywhere in the world. It's all one species. And it's in its own family. It's extremely unique. It's just the one species.
And I have a very nice question. Can human transmit the disease to whale sharks?
We don't know. There are very few. So a disease that moves between animals and humans is called the zoonosis, and there are very few human fish zoonoses. We don't seem to transmit diseases readily between each other. That being said, there are a few sort of fossil viruses that we find evidence for if we look at the genes of humans and if we look at the genes of sharks. Sometimes viruses will leave behind a genetic trace, and there are a few viruses that we see, but those are fossil viruses. Those are old. Those are ancient. So it happens, but it's rare. There's one fish disease that we look out for when we're filling out ethics paperwork and when we're filling out biosafety paperwork for fish. And it's usually something that aquarists get dealing with aquarium fish on a regular basis. I'm not sure how readily it transmits to humans. How readily human diseases transmit to sharks, it's probably pretty low. Our immune systems are very different. There's the viruses that are adapted to us or pathogens that are adapted to us are probably not particularly well adapted for sharks.
And one more question.
Go for it. I love questions.
What the shark do they eat?
The whale shark or? Okay.
The whale sharks.
I'm going to hold off on that question because I've got some good slides for it coming up.
Okay, great.
Cool. So going down and looking, so this is actually, based off of our numbers, we have a fairly small aggregation in Elite. We have colleagues in the Gulf of Mexico, in Australia, in the Philippines, who are working on their 1,000th individual. They're past 1,000 individuals. We're at 165. But what we lack in sheer numbers, we make up for in just how weird the aggregation here is. So one of the things we can do when we look at sharks, when we actually go down and we're looking and we're swimming with them, is we can take a dive down look at their pelvic fins and see if it's a boy or a girl. And the boys have basically these two pokey bits on their pelvic on their pelvic fins, and they get bigger in the mature ones, and the females just lack the two pokey bits. These things are called claspers, and if you see those, it's male. If you don't, it's female. And by going and looking at that, we can tell what we're seeing on the aggregation. So before I talk about Ship-a-bill, let's talk about what every other Western Indo-Pacific aggregation sees. You can see Djibouti right next door, 85% male. Tanzania, just keeping going down the African coast, 87% male. Qatar, 69% male. Ningaloo, 82% male. Most of these aggregations are dominated by juvenile males. We get a fairly even split. The ones that are unknown, the shark was too fast, we couldn't get under it. But for the most part, we see about 50-50, which means we're getting a uniquely high number of juvenile females. And that's not just unique for the Indo-Pacific, that's pretty unique for the rest of the world. There are a couple of aggregations that are dominated by mature females. Most aggregations are dominated by immature males. There is a noticeable lack of immature females at these sites. So where are they going? And these are questions that having a weird site like what we have in Ship-a-bill can help us answer. So in addition to getting roughly equal numbers, they're using the same habitats. So here the dots are sightings of male sharks or female sharks. Blue is male, pink is female. And you can see they're all mostly concentrated on this northwest corner of Ship-a-bill, of this reef. So we're seeing the sharks. We're getting photo IDs. We're identifying their sex, and we can see this sort of population dynamics and the different demographics. We can also see if we're seeing the same sharks over and over again. And these are two female sharks that we have, two of our juvenile females, that we've seen over and over and over again for nearly a decade. And we've also, and I'll talk about this later, we've also put acoustic tags in them. And so we've either seen or acoustic tagged them in most of, or acoustically detected them in most of the years that we've been studying this aggregation. So the sharks do come back in multiple years. The same sharks keep returning. And that is a really useful finding. It helps us, it also helps with the population modeling, and it also helps us tease out some of the behaviors, especially when we get tags on them. The last thing that I'm going to talk about when we can actually physically go down there and we see a shark is we can see a feeding shark. So if you see back here, this is the mouth of the shark coming out of the water. And when we're seeing them down in elite, this is the behavior we usually see. This is called active feeding. So the shark is at the surface, pushing its mouth through the water just by swimming, and that's ram feeding. But it's also using its cheek muscles to suck water down. So it's actively taking in water. It's using its cheek muscles as a pump. It's passively ramming water through its mouth. It's just trying to get as much water, as much plankton through its mouth as it possibly can. So that's the shark. They only do this behavior in extremely dense concentrations of plankton. They only do this where there's a ton of food because it's energetically expensive. They have to be getting in a ton of food just to make it worthwhile. So the shark is here, and here's our net, and we're dragging this off the back of the boat. So we have a real whale shark, we have a real whale shark, we have a real whale shark back here, and we have a fake whale shark, that's our net, up here. And so this is one of our students, this is a PhD student named Royal, and this here's a visiting student from a university, I believe in Scotland. And they dragged their fake whale shark, they dragged their net, and they collected all of this stuff, all of this plankton that right next to where the shark was feeding. So this is what we think the shark is eating. And we've done this a couple of times, and we've gotten some different results. So up here in this corner, these are called lucifer shrimp. And this is what we see them eating in Tanzania all the time, and sometimes we see them eating them here. But we also see them feeding on patches of copepods, these little things. So if you've seen SpongeBob, plankton is a copepod. We'll see them feeding in dense patches of copepods. We've had toes come up with crab larvae. The basic thing is we're seeing them feed on little crustaceans, big swarms of little crustaceans. So I hope that answers the question. Here, what we're seeing is we're seeing them eat little crustaceans. Elsewhere, they're eating little baby mantis shrimps. They're eating lucifer shrimps. They're eating copepods. They're eating fish eggs. They're eating different things. The common thread is they're eating different things that are in very dense concentration. So they're not targeting any particular one thing. They're targeting what's ever swarming at the time. They're targeting the big swarm that's really worth it for them to go out. All right, so I'm going to switch gears here and move away from stuff that's just we're going down there and we're swimming with the shark and we're doing this all on our own. So we do still need to swim with the shark to do some of this, but I'm going to talk about acoustic monitoring. And this here is an acoustic receiver. This is just something we leave down in the water all the time. It's there looking for whale sharks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, looking for our tagged sharks. They're down there right now. And it's really great to have that for times when I can't go down to a leaf and get in the water. Times like, a global pandemic. So we have these stations, and here's one of my colleagues, this is Maha. She's fixing a station that we had down in the offshore. This is a station on Ship of Bill. And these stations just, all they do is listen all the time. And so here's a map of the Alethe area. One of these dots is a station. And so this is our array. It's down there listening for whale sharks all the time. And we can start to talk about which parts of this array do we usually see, which parts of the array detect the most sharks, what season do we see the sharks in. We can start answering some really interesting questions that are important for conservation. Because, if the sharks are only there for 3 months out of the year, well, then it's easier to protect those 3 months. If the sharks are only using particular area, then you protect that area and you don't really necessarily have to worry about protecting the entire region.
Doctor,
Yep.
why do they return to Alethe every year? Is the water suitable and the food appreciated?
So we think, based off of what we're seeing, we think they're coming back when the food is, we think there's a seasonal pulse in available food. We think they're coming back to feed. And that there's something going on with a combination of factors. So up here in this bay, you've got a very productive mangrove swamp. You've also got an outflow from one of the big prawn farms that are on this part of the coast. So there's a lot of sources of nutrients, but some level of whale shark presence predates the prawn farm. So the prawn farm might be exacerbating something that was happening before. It might be increasing the number of whale sharks coming to Alethe with the nutrient-rich water. But there was also nutrient-rich water coming out of this mangrove swamp. And there's a whole bunch of factors that could be contributing to why the whale sharks are showing up there. And we only have the last link of that chain. We've only really established the last link of that chain, which is there's a ton of food in the water. Why there's a ton of food in the water? That's a question we're still working on. And figuring out how to make it so that those processes continue is high on our priorities list for making sure that, that this site remains active, because this is a treasure. The whale shark aggregations are not only beautiful, and it's not only wonderful to be able to see them and go into research on them, but they're valuable tourism attractions. A lot of the places that have these, it's a huge source of income for their local economies. So trying to figure out how we can conserve this, it's not only a, tree hugger, hippie environmentalist thing, it's a, selfish capitalist, heartless, evil, blah, blah, blah. There's multiple motivations for wanting to conserve these things. I tend to lean on the environmental hippie side, but I can sort of see the capitalism, if the capitalism motivation is what gets people to conserve this, I'm all for it. There is definite tourism value in a whale shark aggregation, and a lot of other places have found the value in that and have used that as a motivation for the community to conserve their aggregation. So here's our acoustic array, and then the next side of this method is an acoustic transmitter. So this is an anchor, and we'll use that. We'll inject that under the shark's skin, and it'll hold this. It's a little out of focus here, but this gray acoustic tag. Now, we inject them under the shark's skin. Here you can sort of see the gray tags a little bit better. Here I am rigging them up. We sort of get the question a lot. So this is a tagging. We're using a pole spear that gets injected. This region where this is one of our field techs named Tane is putting this tag. It is very poorly innervated. There's not a whole lot of nerves there. A lot of times we're hitting these animals as hard as we can because, as I said, they have the thickest skin in the animal kingdom. And a lot of times they don't react. They just keep happily feeding at the surface. If sometimes they'll like wiggle a little bit, they don't like it, and they'll dive. And then we'll see them 5 minutes later feeding at the surface. It's sometimes stressful for the animal, but it's not a big deal. We equate it to something like a mosquito bite. We're not even breaking through we're not even breaking the skin, essentially. We're just embedding this within that 13 centimeter thick skin layer in a region that doesn't have very many nerves to begin with. So most of the time, if we do it right, the shark doesn't react. It kind of takes a little bit of it's kind of insulting almost. You do all this effort to chase it down and put a tag in it, and it doesn't care. So
I have a question. In which particular season do they merely visit Shab Hubble? You know, in Mexico, they feed in some areas during in months 7 and 8, I guess. Is it the same here?
No, and that's actually really interesting. So if we look at our acoustic tags, when we see the acoustic, so here, this is, the blue line is the peak in sightings, and the red lines are the peak in acoustic detections. And you can see it's sort of at the beginning. So here's 2010, we started doing it, we put a bunch of tags out. And then the chances of us seeing the same sharks come back in 2011, okay, this is sort of peaking at the beginning of the year. So it starts going up in January, keeps going up in February. It peaks in March, April, and May, more so in April and May. And then it sort of declines in June, and they're usually not present throughout the rest of the year. We might get 1 or 2 very brief visits by one shark every month. And it's just them swimming by to go somewhere else. It's not the same thing as the aggregation. So we'll see this big spike. Okay, we'll tag the shark, and a few days after it's tagged, it's still hanging out. We're very likely to see it. And then the season ends, and we're not likely to detect it anymore. And then the season starts up again. Okay, there's a good chance we'll detect it again. And it happens over and over and over and over. Every year, we see this big spike in the likelihood that we will detect the same sharks that we tagged last year. And if we look at the sightings, so the sightings are telling us the same thing, but the probability is lower. And that makes sense because we can only get sightings on the sharks when we're out there. We can only go out there during the day because the boat captains don't want to run their boats into a reef at night. We can only go there during good weather, and we can only get so many boat days a season. And we can't see the sharks if the sharks aren't coming to the surface. And they don't necessarily need to come to the surface because they can breathe underwater. So the visual data and the acoustic data, they're telling us the same story, but the acoustic data is just better at it because the acoustic detections can happen when the sharks are at depth, they can happen at night, they can happen when we're not there. Once we get the tag in the animal, we can observe that shark with the acoustic array without having to be there. The next thing we can tell with the acoustic, so if you remember the map of the acoustic array, each of these circles is a receiver, and the bigger circles are seeing more sharks per day that the receiver is out, okay? So some of our receivers never detect whale sharks. Some of our receivers detect, especially on Ship Bill, detect lots of whale sharks. And this is a really big hotspot. And you see multiple big circles concentrated here. And then we got this circle up north where we very rarely visit this area of the elite region, but the receiver there does get a lot of detection. So we weren't expecting this. And it's one of the reasons why you do the acoustics to begin with, is to see if there are sharks showing up places that you don't normally visit. And so we can start looking at this, and it's like, look, this is if you're wanting to protect the whale shark aggregation, if you're wanting to like put a go slow zone for boats, or like really enforce the no net fishing, because gill nets are illegal, but it's not super well enforced always. So if you really wanted to start like enforcing it, you could enforce it in very specific months of the year and in very specific areas that are seeing high concentrations of whale sharks. I mean, hoping that they'll enforce it throughout the entire Red Sea would be great, but it's not always realistic. So giving the enforcement agencies the data to concentrate their efforts where it's most useful is something that we love to be able to do. So the last one I want to talk about, the last method I want to go through.
1 second. I have question. Say, how old are the size in the Red Sea? Are they getting older and they leave, or are they settling in the Red Sea?
So that's a really interesting and complex question. So we don't exactly know how old our sharks are. We have a couple of age and growth curves from other areas, because it's very difficult to tell how old a shark is without killing it. When you fish market, you find a shark, you can cut it open and you can get a vertebra out of it. And you can slice that vertebra, get a very thin section, look at it under a microscope, and you can count rings in that vertebra. And it's like tree rings. It's usually one ring a year. And you have to prove that for sharks. It's not always one ring a year, but a lot of the times it's what they call an annularis. It is one ring a year. And so you count the rings, and that's how old the shark is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's a really interesting. There's a guy named Gregor Callier who's sort of specialized in doing this on a lot of different sharks. And there was just recently a paper published where they confirmed that whale sharks, it's one ring a year. So when we get a whale shark washed up on the beach, or we get a whale shark that was caught by a fisherman illegally, we can get the vertebra out, we can get the science out of it, we can do the best that we can, and tell how old it is.
So the fishermen hunt them. Is there retail value in their fins or meat or skin?
There's no real value here. The whale shark, but we know of one whale shark that was bycaught, and it's because it had one of our tags in it, and the fisherman thought we knew, and so he just turned himself in because the shark was tagged and he thought we knew, and it was an accidental catch. He didn't know what to do with it. It was too big for him to try and take to the market, and nobody here would want it anyway. The meat's not very good. It's tasteless. The Taiwanese used to call it tofu fish. Because the meat it's tasteless. It tastes like tofu. So they're not actively hunting it, but the sharks do get accidentally entangled in fishing gear, especially illegal gill nets. So that fisherman did get in trouble because he set an illegal gill net trying to catch other fish, and he ended up catching one of our sharks. And then, fortunately, one of our scientists, a woman named Julia Spate, was down there. And she did a full dissection. She got the vertebra out. She got a whole bunch of tissue samples on it. It was the best we can do with a bad situation. And I'm really grateful that she was down there, because we have tried to do what we can with those tissues, just so that the animal, something good came out of the animal's death. So no, they're not really targeting them here. The fins are like semi-valuable in the fin trade. But only as a sign. They never use them for shark fin soup. It's just fin places will sometimes have whale shark fins. We have fins here. It's a giant sign. That's it. But they're hard to move. They're illegal to move. And the old market for fins mostly went through Yemen, and that's largely closed down now. So there was a market for shark fins in Saudi, but that market went through Yemen to Hong Kong, and so either it's gone underground or it's just not as present as it used to be. Anyway, and it was never really targeting whale shark fins; it was targeting other sharks. Any other questions? Good, great. Let's keep going. So the next thing I want to talk about is satellite telemetry. And satellite telemetry, these tags, they don't last as long as the acoustic tags. We've had acoustic tags that lasted nearly 10 years on that whale shark 33 that I mentioned earlier. But what they can do is they can detect the sharks if the sharks go anywhere. They can sort of tell us where the sharks went, regardless of how far away it goes from our study site. And so most of the sharks that we tag, this is about 40 tags worth of whale sharks. Most of our tag sharks from Ship-a-Bill just went out into the southern central Red Sea, bouncing between, Saudi Arabia and Sudan, Eritrea, almost down into the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb off of Yemen. Most of our satellite tag sharks, they're just bouncing around the southern central Red Sea. We did have a few that went north. We had, I believe this is 3 sharks that went north. And then we actually had 5 sharks that eventually left the Red Sea. So all of these sharks started off in Ship-a-Bill, and you can tell that they left the Red Sea very easily because the Red Sea water is so peculiar. Red Sea water is hot down to 2,000 meters. It's about 22 degrees all the way down to 2,000 meters. As soon as they leave, when they start diving, we get some depth and temperature data from these tags. It starts getting way cold, way fast, and it's outside the Red Sea. This type of cold water doesn't exist in the Red Sea. So we can confirm that a bunch of our sharks, there is connectivity, there is connection between these Red Sea sharks and the wider Indian Ocean. We do see some of the sharks leaving, but we didn't notice any sort of correlation with sex. We didn't notice any correlation with how big the shark was. So it's not like the sharks are aging out of the Red Sea. It's just some sharks are leaving and some sharks are not. Now, the really cool things that we can do, the really cool stuff that we get to do is when we're able to get multiple tags out on these animals. And we can start combining acoustic data with satellite data. And we can talk about combining the sightings data with all of that as well. And so when we do this is whale shark 14. And here is a satellite track that includes some acoustic data. So we can show, if you look up in this corner, we can show, okay, so this is north-south. So the y-axis is north-south. The shark isn't tagged in Ship-a-Bill. It goes way down south away from Ship-a-Bill, comes back to Ship-a-Bill, leaves again, and then we hear it the next season in the acoustic array. So there are multiple migrations away from Ship-a-Bill, back to Ship-a-Bill, multiple times. And we can do this for quite a few sharks. We've got about 15 sharks we've got about 40 sharks that had both acoustic and satellite tags. And we can, for 15 of those sharks, we can show definitive multi-seasons migrations away from Ship-a-Bill and then subsequently returning to Ship-a-Bill the next season. So this is important. This set of characteristics that I've described is fairly important because what we've shown, characteristics of Ship-a-Bill, with the sightings data, we can show a high abundance of juveniles. We can show that they're resident for a season. And we can show a tendency for those sharks to return in successive seasons. Okay.
Doctor, just have a question. What is the range of the acoustic tags?
The range of the acoustic tags depends a lot on the environment, but so we do range test our array. And what we tend to see is about 500 meters. That the range of where if we have a tag that's 500 meters away from our receiver, the receiver will detect it 50% of the time. So that's what our range is, and that's how we define the range of an acoustic tag.
Why did the shark die in the gill net from drowning? If they caught accidentally, can you not just release it?
So a gill net, they leave it. They're not there to realize that something has gone wrong. It's sort of like a fish trap. It's sort of I can set a bunch of these traps and go away, and when I come back, they're full of fish. Well, he came back, and there was a whale shark in it that was already dead because it hit the barrier, and most sharks are simply not used to barriers existing at all. They're used to the open ocean where they can go up, down, left, right, sideways. They're not used to barriers. So it hits a barrier, panics, and gets wrapped up. And then it can't feed water over its gills effectively, and it drowns. So the fisherman came back, had a 1,000-kilogram juvenile whale shark in his net, and didn't know what to do, and saw that it was tagged and was like, "Oh, of course they know they're monitoring this animal. I have to turn myself in. It's my only choice." If he had not turned himself in, we probably never would have known. The animal would have just been. We would have stopped detecting that animal. It was a little bit. I mean, it was whale shark 31, which a lot of the guys on our boats that we were working with were Filipino guys, and they used to call it basaway. It means the one that always came up, because in 2011 we would see this shark nearly every day, and then it got tangled up in this gill net and it drowned. It was really sad. It drowned a year to the day after we tagged. It was a real the least we can do is get as much science as we can out of it. So I'm really glad Julia was down there to collect the tissue samples, to collect the vertebrate. I'm really glad the fisherman made the mistake of thinking that we knew that something happened to our shark. I'm sad that the shark died.
So, looking at whale shark anatomy, is there any sharp parts inside it?
Is there any what?
Is there any sharp parts inside it?
Are there sharp parts inside the shark? No. The shark has. If we're looking at whale sharks in particular, it does have teeth. In fact, it has more teeth than any other shark, but they're small and they're not particularly useful for anything. So the teeth look like a file, and so actually where it gets its scientific name, Rhineodon, it just means file tooth. And there was a mistake at the printer, so the E got misprinted as a C in the original description. So in the original description, it's Rhincodon, and that stuck. So, just a weird story about how it got its name. It got its name because of a typo. But they do have these little, and they're sort of sharp-ish, but they're too small to be useful for anything. And the whale shark doesn't need them for anything, except maybe during breeding. But nobody's ever really seen whale sharks breed. There's a couple of reports from an island in the Atlantic called Santa Helena, but there's no confirmed case. In other sharks, during mating, the males will bite the female just to get purchase and get the right positioning. And whale sharks might do the same thing, and that might be the only use they really ever get out of their teeth, is when the males bite the female during coupling. But nobody's ever seen whale sharks breed, so we have no idea. But that would be the closest thing to sharp parts inside of a whale shark. Some other sharks have fin spines that are poisonous, but whale sharks don't have them. In fact, I don't think we have any sharks in the Red Sea that have them. So that I don't know of any pointy bits inside of the shark. Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Captain Khalid is asking, given the peaceful nature of the huge creature and its anatomy, could could it be the same one that was mentioned in the Hebrew Bible and the Quran in the story of Jonah and the 18th
So,
century?
and the giant fish, yeah. There's been some thoughts on that. So in English, it usually gets translated to Jonah and the whale. However, in the end of the story, Jonah gets he gets vomited out of the whale, right? And that sort of makes more sense for a shark, because the sharks can sort of turn their stomachs inside out at will. They just to get rid of toxins, just to get rid of anything that they might have eaten, which is dangerous. A lot of times, if you see a shark that was caught by a fisherman, by a hook and line, a lot of times when I look at some of those sharks and dissect them to see what was in its stomach, the stomach's empty because it had turned its stomach inside out trying to get rid of the hook. So there is some scholarship there is some sort of scripture scholarship on whether or not the great fish in Jonah and the whale, Jonah and the fish, is a reference to a very large shark. And certainly the whale shark is huge, but the idea that their throat is way too small to accommodate a person. They're normally eating plankton, which they have a very small esophagus. The opening is about the size of a fist. So even if you manage to swim down a feeding whale shark's mouth, it wouldn't be able to swallow you. I don't know whether or not a basking shark or could actually physically swallow a human, a whole human. But there has been some debate as to whether or not the identity of Jonah's fish was a shark. Anything else? Any other questions? I really like questions because they take me in directions I would never think of going.
Do you have a female whale shark in the Red Sea with their young? Have you seen baby whale sharks?
So no, we have never seen very small whale sharks in a leaf, and we've never seen a female that we were 100% sure was mature. It's much harder to tell if the females are mature than the males, because the males have the claspers, and the little ones, they're little and tiny, and they're differently shaped. And the big ones and the big whale sharks, they can be up to the claspers can be up to a meter long. I've been in the water with a couple of mature males in Tanzania, and it's a completely different fish in a lot of ways. It's huge. The sharks that we see in a leaf are usually around somewhere between 3 and 6 meters, with an average of 4. Whereas some of the big males that I was seeing in Tanzania are 10 meter. You're looking at a 10-meter fish, and it's not just that the total length is, but they get bulkier, they get fatter. It's a completely different animal, just in terms of their proportions. So we've never really seen an animal that I was 100% sure, no, that's a mature shark. There's one female shark that we've been in the water with that was pretty big here, and that was our numbering system. That was whale shark 9, and it was kind of a funny story. We had a student with us that was it was one of her first whale shark experiences, and she's in the water with this giant shark, and we sort of went off because there was another smaller shark that we needed to tag. And so he's like, okay, you stay with this one, this giant, possibly 8 or 9 meter fish. We're gonna go get that one. And she got some alone time with one of the biggest sharks I've ever seen in the Red Sea, and it was a really cool experience for her to have. And I was happy with that little story. But we've only ever seen one potentially mature female shark in the Red Sea, and she might not have been mature. Females mature at something like 9 or 10 meters in whale sharks, because when they give birth, they're giving birth to a huge number of pups. There's only ever been one pregnant female ever caught anywhere in the world, and that was off of Taiwan, and she had 300 pups in her uterus. And it was a really interesting case because they were at different stages of development. So whale sharks give live birth, but they start the embryos start out in eggs, hatch inside the mother, and then she gives live birth.
And how big are the whale sharks at birth?
So they range between about 40 to 70 centimeters at birth. The smallest free living whale shark in the wild that's ever been seen, and I've got a picture of it here later, was about 40 centimeters. And the biggest one in the pregnant female was about 70. So they're born somewhere in that range.
And what is the status of the whale sharks in the Red Sea?
The status of the whale shark worldwide is endangered. There have been population declines at most aggregations. And this reassessment was done in 2015, 2016 by a friend of mine, actually, by Simon Pierce and Brad Norman. They led the team that did the reassessment that shifted it from being vulnerable to endangered. And it's now considered endangered globally throughout its entire range, so including the Red Sea.
So let me share, before we continue, small video about a rescue whale shark, and then we continue.
Oh.
a small movie about rescue whale shark.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just based off of the style of fishing boat that was. I'm guessing that was a bagan fishing boat in Indonesia. And yeah, they do catch whale sharks occasionally, but because the fishermen are present and because they're cooperating with the sort of people who want to do whale shark tourism and the people who want to do whale shark conservation, they're very good at getting those sharks out of those nets. There was a similar situation in Tanzania where I was working, where you get these sort of circle net fisheries, and the sharks sometimes get stuck in the net. And usually, if it's during the day, if it's where they can see that the shark is there, they can get it out very, very easily. The problem comes when they're fishing at night and they don't notice that the shark is there until they try and pull in the net and the shark gets tangled, and that gets a little bit more tricky. For just because the shark is tangled, the fishermen don't want to lose their nets. They certainly don't want to lose their catch, and so that's where you start to get a little bit of a antagonistic relationship or antagonistic interaction between fishermen and the whale shark. But for the most part, if it's during the day and it's easy to get the shark out, the fishermen don't want the shark. The shark isn't usually valuable. And it's a pain. It's super heavy to pull back up onto the boat. They'd much rather just get their small little silverfish, depending on where they are.
And if you want to share back your presentation, Dr.
Great. Go back. There we go. Same slide. So these are the characteristics that with our data sets we've been able to really firmly establish for ship-a-bill. Now, based off of a bit of work by Michelle Heupel, who mostly works in Australia, but she defined, let me see if I can get it to progress. She defined shark nurseries using these traits, and it's the same traits. It's 1-to-1. It matches up. We could very easily call Shib-Habil a shark nursery. But there's one sort of missing thing. There's one caveat, and we've already talked about it a little bit, is we do not see these small sharks. This is a picture from the Philippines. This shark was caught by fishermen, and it was fortunately found by some more conservation-minded people. It was swimming around a stick with a string tied to its tail. So it was staked to an area in the shallows, and it was swimming around. Somebody was planning to sell it. This is one of the smallest whale sharks ever seen free swimming in the wild. And whale sharks are born fairly small. And based off of their body plan, we think they're pretty bad swimmers when they're this young. So something that's that big and something that's a bad swimmer is lunch for a lot of big fish. It's not just that we haven't seen them in the Red Sea. We don't see very little whale sharks like this anywhere. And the places where they have been recorded, it's usually open ocean. Most of the places where these have been encountered is on tuna seining boats. And one of them, one record is from the stomach of a blue marlin. One was found still alive in the stomach of a blue shark. One was found being chased by a school of giant trevallies. These things get eaten. It's one of the reasons why the big females are giving birth to so many, or having to produce so many pups. And so we think what's happening with these is that they're never coming into the aggregations because the aggregations are in coastal areas, and coastal areas have a lot more predators. So we think these things are probably hanging out in the middle of nowhere in the open ocean, and staying relatively deep, at least during the day when it's light out and things that hunt by vision could see and eat them. It's one explanation for the spot pattern, is that the spot pattern makes them look like a bunch of tiny little fish if they stay down in the deep that aren't worth going after if you're a big predator. Because the swarm of little fish is just going to disperse. You might get one. It's not worth it. Not worth the energy. Rather than one nice big package of food, which is really worth the energy. So we think that they're hanging out at depth in the middle of the open ocean where nobody's ever going to see them, except in very rare circumstances. So I don't really like calling Shib-Habil a nursery. I prefer to call it like a staging ground for juveniles and subadults, which is very important for the species as a whole. Getting those juveniles and subadults up to a size and age where they can be breeding is one of the most important steps in conserving a species. It might be the most important step in conserving a species. So preserving areas, preserving hotspots and staging grounds like Shib-Habil throughout the world could be very important for us having whale sharks into the future. Here's another picture. I think this one was caught off of Taiwan. They put a number tag on it. That's what's sort of looped through its dorsal fin. And then they released it. But I like this shot because you get a sense of just, how big the animal is. The guy's releasing it. His hands are right there. This is a whale shark, and it's tiny, and it looks exactly like a whale shark. Its spot pattern is already there. It just really conveys, baby whale shark. And I like putting them into presentations because they're adorable. People like them. So I'm almost done. Pardon me. I'm almost done. I just want to return back to this slide. So this is where research on whale sharks in the Red Sea was, 30 years ago, not that long ago. Before the discovery of aggregations, this is where whale shark research was almost everywhere. We've got 4 encounters. They were impaled on steamshippers. We've got 4 points and different in space and time. And I'm really happy that we've been able to take that. Don't worry about what's on this graph. It's just we've been able to take that and produce a bunch more data. We've been able to push that into the future. We've greatly expanded the amount of available data for whale sharks in this region. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing and have done and that we continue to do in that direction. I really love this animal. It's been an absolute privilege to get to do this as my career. And I've been grateful to Saudi for its hospitality in letting me come here and study the wonders of their Red Sea ecosystem. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm ready to hit me with your best shot. Give me as many questions as you can.
I have many.
Great. Last time I might have gone a bit long, and there wasn't as much time as I would have liked for questions. So
I have many. First, how long is the gestation period?
That's one thing we have no idea about. So the pregnant female that was caught off of Taiwan, the pups, the 300 pups, they were at different stages. Some of them were still inside eggs. Some of them actually survived her being caught and were either put into aquaria or released. The aquarium specimens, they monitored them for quite a long time, and we learned a lot about whale shark development after birth. But because they were at different stages, we don't know if the female is giving birth to one big clutch once they're all ready to go and just dumping 300 pups in a place, or if she's giving birth to, okay, these are ready, give birth, and now we've got a few more that are ready, give birth to them, and dropping smaller batches in different places to sort of hedge her bets, not put all of her eggs in one basket. Because if she dumps all of them in a place that isn't suitable, then she's just wasted all of the energy that she put into producing those pups. The other thing is all of the pups apparently had the same father. So you've got 300 pups at different stages of development. We think the females are capable of storing sperm and then fertilizing their eggs as they ripen. So you get one breeding event. You get a male whale shark meets a female whale shark out in the middle of nowhere. The miracle of life happens. You get, and then the female produces offspring in a sort of conveyor belt type fashion when her eggs are ready, and maybe gives birth to them all at once she's got a full uterus, or maybe gives birth to them in smaller clutches in multiple places. So we only know our knowledge of whale shark reproduction comes from one animal. So it's all a little bit speculative, but it's also very interesting.
And Wissam is asking, what are the tiny fishes following the whale shark?
So we get a lot of different fish following the whale shark. So if you look, let's go. I'm just going to quickly zoom through some of my slides. So these guys, you can see this around whale shark 14. These yellow stripy fish. These are golden trevally. They're juvenile golden trevally. They get much bigger and they sort of lose some of the coloration and become a bit more silvery. We see them around whale sharks all the time, just swimming right next to the mouth. The idea is that the best idea is that they're using the animal as just a mobile habitat, sort of like a shelter. If some predatory fish comes by, they can sort of dodge around the whale shark to keep themselves safe. Sometimes that backfires. There's some very good footage from the BBC of a school of swarming fish around a whale shark, and then the whale shark sort of just comes up and starts eating on that school of fish. So sometimes that strategy backfires, and the whale shark isn't a particularly gracious host. You can also see some other fish in this picture that are a little harder to see. I've got a better picture for that earlier in the presentation. Just really gunning for it. Right, I think it's... Oh, it was way far back. Okay. So there's some more golden trevally. The fish they got in the way of the picture was a pilot fish. These are scad. These are yellowtail scad. And we actually use them as a sign. We will look for these in a leaf. They produce a very distinctive school at the surface. They produce a very distinctive bait ball, where you can actually see the tail beats of the individual fish. The bait ball is so tight, you can actually tell when the fish are changing direction. And we'll just, if we see that school, we'll just wait by it, because more often than not, a whale shark will come up into it. Now, whether or not the sharks are homing in on the sound of the school, or the fish are just following the shark, even when it's at a depth that they can't really get to, we don't know. But it's still a really useful signal to us that there are whale sharks in the area. Because, in part because they're going to feed on the same thing. So the scad are going to go to the plankton patch, and the whale shark is just going to be there as well. So yeah, those are the usual suspects when we're talking about little fish swimming next to whale sharks: golden trevally, pilot fish, yellowtail scad.
Okay. Do they whale sharks sleep, and what are their patterns?
So I'll answer the first question. The whale shark. So all animals have to sleep. Every animal has to sleep. But some animals can sleep different parts of their brain separately. So a lot of fish have to deal with this thing where they need to shut down parts of their brain just to rest them. So some fish can swim entirely with the spinal column. They don't need their brain to be active at all. Their spinal cord just handles it as a reflex. Some fish can, and dolphins are a good example, will sleep one half of their brain at a time. So they're never completely shut down, but they go through periods where they're not fully active, where one side of their brain is sleeping, and you can notice, you can see a dramatic reduction in activity when they're doing that. We think that the sharks are probably doing that latter trick, the sleeping different parts of their brain at different times. The patterns. What's the question? I'm not sure which patterns you're talking about.
This is what I've asked. Maybe she can clarify what kind of pattern. Let's go. How deep does a whale shark dive, and does it say there's for long? There is, yeah.
So whale sharks can dive extremely deep, and they might be the record holder for deepest diving shark. They can get down to about, I think the record is somewhere around 1,900 meters. And usually the limiting factor there is temperature. You get down that deep in most places, and it's 4 degrees, and the shark is going to get cold. But part of them being big might be an adaptation to that. So if you're big, you lose heat more slowly. And so they come up from the surface where they can bask in the sun and they can get their body temperature up. And then they make these big deep dive. For whatever reason, we do not know what they're doing down at nearly 2,000 meters. What reason they have for going down there? But they can go down, and then their body will not lose that heat that they gained at the surface as quickly as a smaller fish would. It might be part of the difference between the habitat selections of juveniles and the habitat selections of fully adult sharks, is that the bigger sharks can take more advantage of deeper, cooler water. So, yes, they can dive deep. Was there a second part of that question?
How long they can stay?
So they can stay down, depending on how far they're going. They can stay down for different lengths of time. Usually that's dependent on temperature, like I said. After big deep dives, they'll usually come back up to the surface and have to rest at the surface and bask in the sun for a few hours before they make their next dive. In the Red Sea, it's not temperature that's limiting them. We've got some dives from our satellite tags that are about 1,300 meters. What we think is the limiting factor in the Red Sea is oxygen. There are some, as you get deeper in the Red Sea, the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water becomes less and less and less and less. And so your really deep Red Sea organisms have to deal with those oxygen minimum zones. And they have to be well adapted for dealing with the lack of oxygen. So the limiting factor in the Red Sea is not temperature. It's the temperature everywhere else. The limiting factor here is probably oxygen. And so the amount of time, I'm sorry, it's unsatisfying. I can't give you a really solid amount of time that they can stay down, because it depends on the environment they're in. If they're down in warm water with lots of oxygen, they can stay down there forever. They do not need to come to the surface. They can breathe underwater. So at certain depths, they can stay down there quite happily, indefinitely.
Can you give us a little bit of information about their vision and sensation? Is it the same of the sharks, the real shark, and the same?
So there was only very recently some work on the opsin levels in whale sharks and some of the proteins in their eyes. Their vision is probably fairly poor because they don't really need to invest in it. If you look at some of the research about the structures of their brain, there's a woman named Kara Yopak who's done quite a bit of excellent research on shark brains. And the whale shark, most of its brain is dedicated either to smell, in terms of sensation, in terms of what it's sensing. Its brain is dedicated to smell. It has very large olfactory bulbs, or to hearing. They've got quite a good sense. They've got quite a good brain organization for dealing with auditory information. So they're probably not seeing a whole lot. Their eyes are small in comparison to the rest of their body. They don't really need vision to hunt because they're going after plankton, which is really too small to hunt visually for them anyway. And once they find a plankton patch, they don't need to see it. They can just open their mouth and guzzle down water and separate the plankton from the water. In fact, when we're with whale sharks in the wild, we have to be very careful with the boat, because if the shark is feeding, it'll run straight into the boat. It's not that will particularly hurt the shark. It's just unless there's rough water and the boat comes down on the shark. It's just that we don't want to disrupt the shark's natural feeding behavior. We don't want to bump it on the head and cause it to dive. We want to do some work with it. We want to get the photos. So we have to be careful that we don't cut the shark off, because it'll just run straight into you without knowing that it's doing.
So I'll be end with the final question. I have a lot of questions, to be honest. I think if we will not finish till tomorrow. I'll end with an important question. For the rest of the question, I'll send it to you, Doctor. If you can send it to me back, I'll send it to them again by email. For all this question. I'm sorry, there's many questions.
I love talking about sharks. I'll be happy to write down answers.
Yeah, if you can be with us on our live Instagram, something called Dive Lounge, live on Instagram. So maybe we can talk more about sharks and whale sharks and answer them about all these questions.
Sure, great. If you just want to have a separate thing that's a question and answer session,
yeah,
I'm happy to do that. I love talking about sharks.
I'll mention the date later, so they can join us on the live Instagram on Hope of Spring Dive, and join us live, and you can answer on all these questions. Now let me end on this question. Captain Khalid is asking you, why did you choose a whale shark to study, and what inspired you?
So I didn't choose whale sharks specifically. I've loved sharks since I was 3. It's unsatisfying to people where they're, how did you choose what you wanted to do? I really didn't. I've wanted to do this since I was very, very young, and I just never changed my mind. But the inspiration, that one is very easy for me to answer. There was a woman named Eugenie Clark, very famous shark biologist. And when I was 3, she had this National Geographic video with Rodney Fox. And I watched it so many times that the video store made us stop renting it. They said other nerds were looking for that particular National Geographic video, and that we had to wait our turn again. So we just kept renting it over and over again until they made it stop. I was obsessed with that. And so Eugenie Clark is easily my inspiration for having become a shark biologist. And whale sharks in specific, I've known my boss here for a very long time, and he knew that I worked on sharks. I did some aquarium work on bull sharks during my undergrad, and he started working here when KAUST first started up. And he's like, well, we've got a whale shark aggregation. Do you want to come help us set this up? And I was like, yeah, sure, great. I'd love to. I had never seen a whale shark before. And so he gets me here. We see like probably 70 different whale sharks that year. He's like, do you want to come here as a student and just study this? Yes. No, I was sold immediately. Whale sharks, I saw my first whale shark in 2010, and the water was full of plankton, so you couldn't see anything. So it's just like, there's nothing. Oh, that's a whale shark. Okay. All right, deep breaths. All right, that's amazing. I'm so happy. I had a real nerd moment, and then I was sold. I wanted to come. I've been coming back for a decade, and I'd like to keep coming back and keep studying sharks, and in particular, I'd love to keep studying and working on whale sharks here. It's amazing what you have down in the lake. It is a treasure, and I hope it's something that we can work to conserve.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just let me remind what we have next week. Just 1 second. Okay, again, Wednesday we will have a workshop about free diving with Natalia Trakova, and Thursday we have a sea turtle awareness, and Monday we have the dive lounge, not a webinar, on our live with Captain Khalid Al-Razouki. It's on a live Instagram. He will be with us on our dive lounge. For the dive lounge of Dr. Jesse, we will be mentioned later the date, and for all the links, I will put them on the Instagram with the post, so you can take the link. And this is the QR of the Instagram. And if any question, you can contact me directly or send me an email. Doctor, again, thank you. Thank you for everybody. Hope to see you again next week.
Yeah. Thank you. I really love talking about sharks. Thanks for the opportunity. I get to nerd out.
Doctor, thank you so much.
Yeah.
See you.
Goodbye. Yeah. Looking forward to the next thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.